Oftentimes when we think about March Madness, we talk about all the upset bits. But then the second thing we talk about are all the players who show up and show out who we may not have heard of in the regular season or weren't as effective or as good in the regular season, whether that's a limited role or they just weren't playing good ball at that point in time. And then when March Madness rolls around, they deliver the biggest performances. I think about players like Dante DiVincenzo when he had 30 points against Michigan for Villanova. You think about players like Davion Mitchell off night, who was locking up Quentin Grimes, and he was locking up Andrew Nimhart and other talented players in their run to win the national championship at Baylor. Florida this past season with Walter Clayton, Will Richard, Elijah Martin, and even Denzel Aberdeen. And the list goes on and on. And because of their success in March Madness and their ability to be a talented scorer or have tremendous defense or just be super athletic and have momentum swinging plays and possessions, their draft stock, it goes through the roof. It elevates. Maybe a guy who's going to be a second round selection who then becomes a first round selection, aka Walter Clayton this past year. Or you have players who went from undrafted to second round, Will Richard and Elijah Martin this past year. Or you have players rise from second round to first round, like Dante DiVincenzo, or late first round selection to even a lottery selection, like Zach Edey did in 2024 after averaging nearly 30 points a game and nearly 15 rebounds per game in the 6 game span that Purdue was in the tournament. I mean, he had 37 points in the national championship against UConn alone. So you see it happen in March Madness, and a lot of it has to do with A, they're on the biggest stage. B, they're national televised games with all the attention in the world from scouts, coaches, and fans. And you're also going against the best competition in a winner go home environment. And with all those things curated together, it makes coaches and scouts put that much more of an emphasis on those performances and say, you know what? If they can deliver in that type of moment, we want him over somebody who was averaging 17 points in college, but maybe didn't make March Madness or had a stinker and got kicked out and they lost in the first round. It doesn't matter how old you are or how tall you are. If you can perform on the biggest stage, coaches want you. And then you look at college football. And last year it expanded 12-team format. 12 teams make it, and it's like that obviously this year, and it could even expand to 16 teams come next year or the year after that. And with the stage being just as big and environments just as loud, if not louder, because you play the first round at an away team home environment, and it's a winner go home setting against the best players and the best teams in college football, where no one's sitting out like a bowl game, no matter how big that bowl game was, like the Rose Bowl a couple years ago before the 12-team format, players were still sitting out. It didn't have that same feel, that same impact to it. We're going to be seeing a lot of players like we did already last season and already right now in the current CFP have their draft stock rise. If you look at last year, you saw Cam Scatterboo go from maybe a day three, a late day three selection to a fourth round selection atop the fourth round. You saw Travion Henderson go from, is he running back five to running back three, the surefire running back three after averaging 100 yards per game in 4 games with Ohio State and having 5 touchdowns in those performances. You saw Abdul Carter elevate from a top 10 pick to the third pick in the draft because he was playing through an arm and shoulder injury against Notre Dame and had a pair of sacks against Notre Dame. Performed well against SMU. With that in mind, here are the 10 players that I've seen thus far in the CFP format elevate their draft stock and make them stand out as a bigger prospect than what they were before the CFP. The first one being Trinidad Chambliss. Chambliss looked like a player who was going to be deciding which college was he going to be playing at next season. Now he looks like a player who's asking the question of how high am I going to go in the 2026 NFL draft? He looks like the third best quarterback available above players like Ty Simpson. Trinidad Chambliss had 362 yards passing, 2 passing touchdowns, and no turnovers against Georgia, and was making NFL level throws throughout the game, whether it was back shoulder passes, the anticipatory throws, the deep balls to players like Stribling, the composure in late game situations, and even in the middle of the game when Ole Miss was trailing by double-digit points. And then when Ole Miss was trailing by 2 scores. You saw him make elusive plays in the pocket, like the one at 3rd and 7, when he went all the way to the back of the end zone and delivered a 30-yard pass that picked up the much-needed 7 yards for the first down to Kewan Lacey. You saw him play with a lot of composure, a lot of leadership, and was making every single throw in the book and then some against Georgia. The second player that stood out to me was Mark Fletcher, running back of Miami. Against Texas A&M, he had 171 yards rushing, and against Ohio State, 110 total yards and 1 touchdown. He was a catalyst in both games for this Miami's offense, and he's only a third-year running back, so he doesn't have the wear and tear. His frame is 6'1", strong guy, broke a lot of tackles in both games against two of the most ferocious defenses in college football between Ohio State and Texas A&M. In doing so, at Kyle Field, which is one of the loudest, if not the loudest, stadiums in all of college football at College Station. He was breaking arm tackles, and no, he's not necessarily Derrick Henry, but that's who he reminded me of in the plays he was making and the ability to just shake off tackles and have some good straight line speed once he broke through the line of scrimmage. The other player on Miami that stood out to me was Ruben Bain Jr. Ruben Bain was questioned for his arm length, right? 33-inch arm length. Is he going to be a good defensive end, a good edge rusher? And Ruben Bain, again, going against Texas A&M and Ohio State, two talented offenses. He has 4 sacks, 5.5 tackles for loss, 8 total tackles. Against Ohio State, he had 9 pressures and a pass rusher win rate of 34.2%. He reminds me of this year's Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter was playing with a bum shoulder and a bum arm against Notre Dame. And he had a couple sacks against the Fighting Irish in Penn State's loss to Notre Dame last year, but elevated his stock from maybe a top 5 selection to a number 3 selection. Although it was a marginal increase, it's a big increase because of how few picks there are between 5 and 3, obviously, and there's only 5 picks in that line. So when you look at Ruben Bain, he looks like someone who's going from top 10, top 7 with questionable arm length to a player who can truly be a top 3 selection in this year's NFL draft. Looking over at Texas Tech, Texas Tech only had a 1 game span. This is reminiscent of Cam Skattebo. Cam Skattebo had 250 total yards against Texas for Arizona State and 3 touchdowns for Arizona State that game. But because it was such an impactful game, his stock rose because of it. When I look at Texas Tech, I saw 3 defenders have huge impact again on a standalone game on the national stage against Oregon. The first one being David Bailey, 9 tackles, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 passes deflected. He was controlling the outside edge. He was great in the run game, even better in the pass game. And he showed that even when he couldn't get to the quarterback, he can get his arms up and knock down a lot of balls and be a ferocious defensive end. He led college football in sacks this season. His stock is going to move up. Again, similar to Ruben Bain, maybe top 10 pick to a top 7 selection because of this performance. Jacob Rodriguez is the fourth player. Jacob Rodriguez was a player who was probably going to be a day 3 selection because of positional value. He was 5th in Heisman voting. He had 11 tackles alongside Ben Roberts, the other linebacker, who had 16 tackles for Texas Tech. And they showed they're impactful in both the pass game and the run game, usually getting to the line of scrimmage before Oregon could even get to the second level to block them. They were hitting the gap, stopping this Oregon run, and they showed that they can control both the pass and run offenses of other teams. And Jacob Rodriguez is a player who I think should go from a day 3 selection to a day 2 selection because of his performance. The fifth one I already alluded to was Ben Roberts, who had 16 total tackles and an interception against Oregon. He was named the Big 12 player of the game in the Big 12 championship for Texas Tech when they defeated BYU. And he's all over the place as well. Great in pass coverage, great when it comes to stopping the run, can make a tackle, really talented player. His draft stock has elevated him as well. The sixth player that I look at in terms of elevation was Malik Benson, a wide receiver from Oregon. He had 5 catches, 119 yards, and 2 touchdowns against James Madison. And then this past game against Texas Tech, he had 5 catches for 51 yards. The wide receiver is 6'1" with a sturdy frame who can make big plays downfield and can also be a reliable target. Looks like the true wide receiver one for Oregon and Dante Moore. With one more game coming up, minimum against Indiana and potentially the national championship, I can really see his stock rising. But right now, he looks like a guy who is borderline even going to be selected round 7, potentially undrafted. He's someone who I think truly deserves a chance to be a 5th-round selection, maybe even a 4th-round selection in this year's draft, just because of his frame and ability to get open and be a reliable target for Dante Moore. The 8th player is another Oregon player, but on the opposite side of the ball of Malik Benson, and that is going to be Bryce Boucher, the linebacker for Oregon. He has 21 total tackles for Oregon in the playoffs against James Madison and against Texas Tech. He's a willing tackler who's really impressive in the run game and stopping the run. He's someone who should be drafted probably around round 4, round 3 to round 5, and he's elevated his stock because of his ability to stop the run and be a willing tackler, a sure tackler, something that you don't necessarily see a lot in the NFL. You can look at all the linebackers, and there's a lot of players, for example, a lot of teams, I should say, including maybe even the Cincinnati Bengals, who can struggle with making tackles. So being able to do that against good competition, it makes you stand out. Oregon obviously shut down the run of Texas Tech because of guys like him. The 9th player is another Oregon defender, and that is going to be Tatum Tuitui, the D end. He has 8.5 sacks on the season, 2.5 sacks, and the CFP 2 sacks against Texas Tech, and was a big reason why Morton had no time in the pocket. One of the best pure passers in college football this year. Couldn't do anything against this Oregon's defense. Obviously, there's another number of reasons, but one of those reasons was because of Tatum Tui, who was getting off the edge at a really impressive rate and causing a lot of havoc on this Texas Tech offensive line. And the 10th player that really stood out to me as someone who's elevated his draft stock, especially in this past game against Georgia, is Ole Miss defensive tackle Xavier Harris. He's 6'7", 320 pounds, and was a game wrecker against Georgia. And the main reason why this Georgia team couldn't pull things together in the second half as an offensive unit. Xavier Harris was eating up tackles, forcing pressure off the middle, not letting Gunnar Stockton stay cool in the pocket, and was also the big reason why Georgia, when they went for it on 4th and 2 at their own 33, which led to the eventual touchdown of Ole Miss to take a 10-point lead, 34-24. The big reason why that play didn't work out. The left tackle was so concerned with double teaming Harris that he went to double team him, and the edge rusher came flying off the side and he delivered a big blindside hit to Gunnar Stockton. Harris, with his massive frame, his ability to play nearly every single snap, almost doesn't rotate. So his ability to be on the field at a constant rate, cause havoc, stop the run, like we saw in the goal to go situation when Georgia was down 3 points and they settled for the field goal to tie the game. Big reason why they had to deal with that was because of Harris, who helped make the tackle on Gunnar Stockton in the 1st-and-goal situation, then helped deliver the big blow to Bowen on the 2nd-and-goal situation, and helped force some pressure to make Gunnar Stockton throw an incompletion on 3rd-and-goal. He is another player who's elevated his stock. I think he was supposed to be maybe a late 1st-round pick. I know ESPN has him as a 4th defensive tackle. He's going to elevate his stock because of that performance and will continue to do so. So those are my 10 guys who I think truly elevated their stock thus far in the CFP. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree? Anyone else I'm leaving out? Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what your thoughts are about this.